sarve bhavantu sukhinah, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschid dukhavag bhavet. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Tat Sat. May all be happy. May no one suffer from any illness. May everyone see goodness everywhere. And may no one have suffering. May there be peace, peace and peace everywhere by God's grace. Good morning, friends, again. The subject is superstitions and spiritual life. That is the subject. Now, what is called superstition? Let us try to know. The dictionary meaning of the word superstition is belief in what is not true. We have many such beliefs. And first let me consider religious superstitions. If we go back in history, then in prehistoric time, our primitive ancestors had some concept of heaven and hell. They thought that the earth was a disc, more or less a round disc, because they would go to the top of a hill, from there they would have a view of the horizon. And that's how they concluded that the earth was like a disc. And in some areas the disc was surrounded by water, sea water. That was their concept. And then when they would fall asleep, they would see some departed souls there in the dream. And those departed souls seemed to be quite all right physically. And they were interacting with the dreamer, just as they did when they were alive. And when the sleep would be over, the dreamers would look for those people, but they are not to be found anywhere. And then they thought, where have they gone? And where have they disappeared? Then some of them saw some high-flying eagles. Eagles were flying higher and higher and higher. And when they would fly higher, they would become smaller and smaller. And they thought that had the eagle flown much higher, then it would become invisible. So there must be a world above which is invisible to our naked eyes. And they called that heaven. They thought that that's where those departed souls had gone. And then again they thought not all those who had died were good-natured. Some of them were not. Would they go to heaven? And they thought that the heaven was controlled by a deity called God Creator. So they thought they must have gone to some bad place. That's why the concept of hell came. That means underground there is a dark region where some bad people after death go. And they call that dark region hell. That's how the idea of heaven and hell came. But this primitive concept of heaven and hell kept on changing in a region where people had time to think and they were not busy just surviving physically. The climate was more enjoyable and food was abundant. That means in the tropical region of the world. And such tropical region was there where India of today was placed. And the people of ancient India, when they would lie down to rest under a tree, they did not have to keep busy just earning a living like those people in Europe. The entire Europe would most of the year be surrounded by ice, and survival was a question. But it was not so in tropical India. So they would lie down and had time to lie down and rest and think. And by such thinking, newer ideas started coming to their minds. There is a book in Hinduism, and that was the religion of those who lived in India, as named by the British. Their ancestors would call that the perennial religion, Sanatana Dharma. And then they had the idea that the earth is not like a disc, it was spherical in shape. So there is in one book, it is mentioned, there is a chapter called Goladhyaya, that means spherical things about, they have mentioned in that book. So there is a sentence, Karatala Kalita Amalakabad Amalam Vidanti Ye Golam. This means it is, the earth is spherical. It is not a flat disc, it is spherical, just as an amalaki fruit is spherical, which is on the hand of a person, on the palm of a person. And amalaki fruit is myrobalan fruit. It is a very common fruit in a country like India, amalaki. So that old idea that the earth was a disc, and there was a heaven above and the hell below, that idea had to be changed, because the earth was spherical. And then ideas kept on changing. Newer ideas came. And there is a scripture called Katha Upanishad in Hinduism. There we read, Yadidam kincha jagat sarvam prana ejati nisritam. Whatever exists in this world is no other than that energy which is vibrating everywhere. So these things differ due to their frequencies of vibration. So how many such worlds are there? They would say, oh, innumerable worlds are there. And each world would be a plane of existence of a certain range of frequencies. And the so-called heaven and hell also were such planes of existence. So, see, the ideas keep on changing. And old superstitions are replaced by new findings. And also in the religion of those people who are called Hindus today, and they had certain scriptures called Vedas. Veda means knowledge. They are not written by anybody, but some people through their thinking came to know certain truths, and those truths they talk about with others who are around them, and then eventually they are recorded in the form of some books. Each of those books is called a Veda. Veda means knowledge. How many Vedas were there? Well, depending upon the antiquity of those truths, there are 4 Vedas: Rig Vedas, Sama Veda, Yajur Veda, and Atharva Veda. Atharva Veda came at the end. And in the Rig Veda, which is the most ancient, there is mention of Sura and Asura. These 2 words, these are Vedic words, and both of them mean good people actually. But later on the meanings started changing, and they started thinking that Sura means something who is good, and Asura means something which is not good. But this was not the original meaning in the Rig Veda. And some Indo-Aryans lived all over the subcontinent which we call India, and also outside India. So there were some Indo-Aryans who lived in that part of the world which is called Iran today. Actually, the word Iran came from Aryan. But anyway, and some Aryans who were there, they were lucky to have a saintly soul among them. His name was Zarathustra. Zarathustra is a word which means Zarathustra, that means white camel. That was the name. And this Zarathustra was a highly evolved soul. And so people heard what he would say, and they would believe what they had heard from Zarathustra to be true. And so there we find the word Asura, meaning someone who is evil also. It is a departure from the Rigvedic word Sura or Asura. So there were some ancient Jews, they were in Babylonian captivity, and they learned the word Asura from those people who are Zoroastrians, who are called Zoroastrians today. And in Zoroastrian literature, the good Sura used to be called Ahura Mazda, and there are some Suras who are not that good, they are called Ahura Man. And from the concept of Ahura Man, the concept of the devil came, and the Jews thought that that was the devil. So that's how ideas kept on changing. So these are religious superstitions. And the hotels in the United States, some hotels don't have room number 13. The number 13 is not considered very auspicious. That's what I heard. Aside from that, there is mania of purification of the body in so-called Hinduism. They would think that taking a shower would make their bodies pure. They did not most probably believe in divisibility of matter. That is, finer particles always cling to the skin of a person. They didn't know it. So that's why they had a mania of purification of the body. They would take showers or dips in lakes and rivers to make their bodies pure. So there was a great saint named Mirabai. Excuse me. She was a woman saint. She came from a princely family, but she was a composer of some songs. And in one song she has mentioned, Neet nahane se hari mile to jal jantu hui. If by taking shower or dip in the water would make me able to see divinity, then I would rather be an aquatic animal. But aquatic animals don't experience divinity. That's what she is saying. फल-मूल खाकर हरी मिले तो बहादुर बदराई. And by eating fruits and roots, there are some people who think that they will experience divinity. But that is not true. There are so many bats and monkeys. They live on fruits and roots of trees. Have they experienced divinity? No. तीरन भकन से हरी मिले तो बहुत मृगिया जा. If by eating vegetables only a person would experience divinity, then there are so many deer and goats. Have they experienced divinity? Not necessarily so. स्त्री छोड़कर हरी मिले तो बहुत रहे हैं खोजा. And if some people think that not to have association with women physically will enable them to experience God, then why not the eunuchs have experienced divinity? That's what she said. And at the end she says, Mira kahe bina prem se na mile nand lala. Mirabai says that without love of God one will not experience God. That is her view. So the mania of purification of the body, etc., that mania will not help one to grow spiritually. And also there were so many other manias. Astrology, palmistry, in these subjects also there are so many so-called truths, but they have not been proved to be true. When I was a young man, I got interested about astrology and also palmistry. And later on I discovered that these are not reliable subjects. There was a famous palmist named Skiro. His life was not that great either. He had to suffer a lot in his old age. Palmistry, knowledge of palmistry didn't help him. And then I also examined the palms of people, and I saw that some people had palms indicating that they would be very successful in life, but they had not attained any success whatsoever. So palmistry was not reliable. So also with astrology. So there are some people who believe that the planets have influence on individuals. So they have to be kept well pleased. That's why in India some certain things are done. For example, when I was a young boy, my milk tooth had to be taken out by the dentist. And when the tooth was taken out, after that bleeding continued for a while. And then of course it stopped. Then someone, a person in our family said, oh, the planet Mars must not be pleased with this boy. That's why he had such bleeding. Astrologically speaking, the planet Mars was not pleased with this boy. So I was asked to wear something which would prevent such effect of the planet Mars. And so probala, that means a coral rock, was considered something which would prevent the effect of planet Mars. If the planet Mars is not happy, then can bring some trouble. So that's why I was asked to wear a ring containing a coral rock. That is called probala. And I went on using it because my parents wanted me to use. I gave up that thing when I became a monk. By that time I had understood that these things were useless. In fact, after I had become a monk, one of my elder sisters came to see me, and I asked her whether she would take that ring from me. And she agreed. That's how I got rid of that the ring containing a coral rock. And there are social superstitions also based on superiority due to race, ethnicity, and complexion of the skin, etc. That's how all these words came in our tradition. Arya and Anarya, Aryan and non-Aryan. And Nara, that means human beings, and Banara, they were not quite human. They were like monkeys. And some American tribes were also there, or they may still be there, I don't know. They used to think that anyone who didn't belong to their tribe, and they were not quite human. They looked like human beings, but they were not quite human. They were inferior. And I have come to also know that the ancient Chinese people, they would consider foreigners as devils. Anyone who was not Chinese, he was a devil, bad person. And in India, the word mlecha came to carry the same meaning. That means a foreigner who is not good enough. Then there are other superstitions like political superstitions. You see, individual selfishness we condemn. A companion which I have, if he is selfish, then I do not consider him to be good. So, selfishness is a disqualification. But if that individual selfishness is expanded, then we think that that is good. And group selfishness. Selfishness of a group is group selfishness. For example, nationalism, etc. When he said that I belong to this nation, that means I have this group selfishness. But that group selfishness is not considered bad. It is strange. And then there is a superstition that any political system will make the world perfect if there is no such superstition, if all are considered equal. That's how this word socialism and communism came. Even at the time of Swami Vivekananda, some 200 years ago, Swami Vivekananda said that I am a socialist not because it is a perfect system, but half a loaf is better than no loaf, he said. But this socialism and so-called communism have failed. These superstitions have failed. And after the independence of India, and the Indian government was created, and before the independence, Indians, a large number of Indians were idealists. They followed Mahatma Gandhi, who was truthful. And in fact, he wrote a book called My Experiment with Truthfulness. That means that was his autobiography. He was a very honest and truthful person. But after passing away of Gandhi, when the government in India was formed by Indians, then some people came who were not that good. And there was a prince, and in India in those days, all over the world there were little kingdoms. And there were little kingdoms, and there are kings, but much later socialism came, and still it is being experimented, whether it works or not. America is a socialist country, a democratic country, but the idea of democracy was there in ancient India also. And there were 10 such democracies where they did not have any kings, only people would govern such countries. There were 10 such republics in India, and those republics would be called Ganarajyas. And Gautama Buddha was born in one such republics. His father was not a king really. His father was the chief of that Ganarajya, People's Republic. And after gaining independence, the government of India chose this maxim, Satyameva Jayate Nanitam. Truth alone triumphs, not untruth. But gradually that truthfulness was being expelled by convenient lies and all that. So once one political leader, he was in the Ministry of India, he came to our headquarters in India, which is in Belur Math, and he gave a talk. There he mentioned that is our scriptures say that truth alone triumphs, not untruth. Satyam eva jayate nanitam. But now the condition of our country is such that mithya eva jayate no satyam. It is now the condition of the country is such that in the government it is lies which win victory over truthfulness. That's what he said. And this is a world of scientists nowadays. So, and I was a science student before I became a monk. And then when I was a student, we read about molecules and atoms, which was the smallest particle. The smallest particle was an atom. But nowadays those ideas have changed. So we have some other particles which are even smaller than atoms. They are quarks, superstrings, meteoritic superstrings, there are membranes, there are deep brains, and there are vibrations. This is the concept of the small things that we have nowadays. And when in earlier days the direction of an electric current was, they had decided that is from this place it goes to that place, from positive pole to negative pole. But later on it was discovered that no, it is the direction of the current was from the negative pole to the positive pole. But they have not changed it yet. And when we were students, we were taught that there were 92 elements in the periodic table. And nowadays, let's say there are not 92, but 118 elements in the periodic table. So things keep on changing. One which is considered very reliable is proved to be unreliable after a while. And there are medical superstitions also. Because the word malaria means bad air. At one time, people suffered from malaria, just as nowadays they are suffering from this new virus, which is causing many deaths. So, malaria, bad air. At that time, they didn't know the cause of malaria. They thought that fever was caused by bad air. So that's why people would be asked to change places. In Hindi, which is an Indian language, it's a hawa badal. And it's change the climate and then it will be all right. That was the idea. But eventually, a scientist came and he discovered that malaria was not caused by bad air, but it was caused by some germs. Caused by some germs, and his name was Ronald Ross, and those germs are in the saliva of some insects such as mosquitoes, and then that would be transmitted from one insect to another or an animal to another. That's how malaria would spread. And so Ronald Ross was the first who discovered that. And that's why he was awarded the Nobel Prize in the year 1902 Ronald Ross. He is a British scientist. He was born and brought up in India, but during British period. And it is he who was given this Nobel Prize for his discovery. But according to Hinduism, the strongest superstition that we have, that is according to Vedanta, the strongest superstition that we have is the superstition that we are our body-mind complex. When I was a boy, I went with a friend to a place to buy things, and that was up on the hills. I grew up in that city which was 1 mile high, that is Shillong. It was the capital of that province. And I went with a friend to buy certain things. And at the base of that hill, Shillong is full of mountains. So at the base of the hill, I saw some people sitting there. They are sweepers. They used to sweep. And most of them were from Punjab, that state. And I saw a wandering holy man seated under a tree and surrounded by those sweepers. And the holy man was saying certain things, and the sweepers who were around him, they were listening to him. Then I became curious with my friend who had accompanied me and sat down there. Then and they were all speaking in that language which is Hindi. And some people asked that holy man, "Oh, these young people have come, why?" Then he said, the holy man said, "They are curious, that's why they have come here." But anyway, after a while, I asked that holy man, "Where do you live?" Then he said, I don't live anywhere. I wander from place to place. I'm here for 7 days and then I will wander to some other place. That's how I will keep on wandering. Then I asked him, while wandering, if you fall ill, what do you do? When he heard that, his eyes sort of sparkled. And he said to me, pointing to his body with his finger, "Arey, yah to kaya dand hai. This body is but a cane. I'll give up this body. I won't go and see a doctor." He said, "Yah to kaya dand hai. This body is only a cane. I'm using it and it will be thrown away." Much later, when I became a monk, I could understand what that monk had said to me, wandering monk. That means he had mentioned what is there in our scriptures. Our scriptures say that the highest truth about this world is that there is divinity. That is the highest truth. And that divinity is called Brahman. Brahman means larger than the largest. Satchit Ekam Brahma. That Brahman alone exists. And it is consciousness. It is one without a second. And so this truth is also called Prajnanam, the supreme truth. And in the scriptures of Hinduism, there are certain words called there are certain sentences, they are called Mahavakyas. That is the greatest sentences. What are they? He said, Aham Brahmasmi, I am divinity, that infinity, divinity. Tattamasi, you are that Brahman. I am Atma Brahma, that's what we consider the soul is that Brahman, divinity. Prajnanam Brahma, and the highest knowledge is divinity. And a person, a human being, is limited by his ego. The ego is a thought of his conscious mind. And he identifies with that, but he cannot identify with that because the owner and the object owned cannot be the same. So if he owns his mind, then how can he be ego? Ego is a thought of the conscious mind. So he must be beyond that. And what is beyond is Brahman, beyond time, space and causation. Infinity itself. And this is what is achieved when a person has a nirvikalpa samadhi. That means that kind of mind when a person has got rid of his or her ego completely. Otherwise, every person is like a wave in the ocean of divinity. As long as there is identification with the form of the wave, there are so many waves. And that identification is ego. When the ego disappears, then only oceanness remains. And that oceanness is the highest truth that can be experienced during nirvikalpa samadhi. The mind does not have any thought at that time. This mind is not there. So this is the highest truth. So we should get rid of this superstition that we are bodies. We are not bodies, we are Brahman. We are divinity. That is the knowledge. This is what is taught. And once that is experienced, we have achieved the goal of spiritual life. The goal of spiritual life is to know our inherent divinity. That's why all theistic religions say that God is omnipresent. God is equally present everywhere, but not equally manifested. In a non-living object, God's manifestation is very little. But in a living object, God's manifestation is more than that. And eventually, a person who has been able to manifest his divinity, this person is called a saint. So if divinity is compared to electric light, then a saint is a person whose divinity is 5,000 watts divinity. And there are some souls who are like some lights which are, who are like multi-million watt light bulbs. They are divinity itself. And they are called divine incarnations. And Ramakrishna, Krishna, Rama, and all, they are divine incarnations. The Holy Mother Sri Sarada Devi is also a divine incarnation. So it is they who are able to teach us what we really are, because they have experienced divinity. They are divinity in human form. So I think This is the connection between superstition and spiritual life. If we have superstitions, then we have yet to be spiritual. And being spiritual means experiencing divinity. And that experience comes without any ego. All right, thank you very much.